furry subcultures. I'm going to talk about two. I'll talk about Therians, so someone has Therians. Alright. And another one. Oh yeah! I'm gonna draw!
This is so advised.
Wait for it. Alright, so Therians. The definition that we're using for Therians loosely defines people who either physically or psychologically or spiritually identify with or as a token animal species. We tend to find that depending on the sample, 6 and 20% of furries call themselves Therians. Another 6 to 15% of furries or so identify themselves as otherkin. And a lot of furries who identify themselves as Therians also call themselves otherkin. You find that compared to furries, Therians are much more likely to say that furry is not a choice. They're much more, they identify much more strongly with their species. They say their species is sort of a deep part of who they are, and they say that they had less choice over what their species is. Therians are much more likely to say that they don't feel 100% human, either physically or mentally, and they're much more likely to say that they would be completely inhuman if they could.
That explains so much about my life.
We also, so here's visually what it looks like. Therians are much more likely to identify with their persona species. This isn't just a species I picked because I like it. This is who I am. Are you standing up because you want to make a point, or are you standing up just to...
No, I'm just trying to get comfortable.
Well, he has your head.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, we also find that Therians they identify with these furry feelings a lot younger. There's a huge spike here, less than 6 years old. A lot of Therians say that this is something that I've always had. I didn't really remember a time before I felt this way. Therians in animals. This is a really cool study that I did here at Oklacon last year. Who remembers doing the picture reaction?
Yes.
Oh, that screwed up my brain.
Here's what we were doing.
Oh, cool.
All right. We find so that was a test. That was a test of how your brain works, essentially. Very simply, we're looking at whether or not. So when a Therian says, "Oh yeah, I consider myself to be an animal," we're saying, "Well, okay, are you actually wired to think that way, or is that just something you're saying?" And we did a test where you couldn't fake it. You couldn't fake that test. It's impossible to, well, not impossible, but it's really difficult to do unless you have like 5 years of experience with this test. And we find that this is true. Therians don't just say this, but they're actually wired to they do identify the concept of me with animals a lot more closely than non-Therians do. You can actually look at patterns of response times and see that this isn't something they're faking. This is the way their brain is wired. So that was cool.
But is that in terms of traits or just their personality?
Their sense of self. When I say the word, you, what words sort of come up? And the word animal is much more closely tied to the concept of me for a Therian than it is for a non-furry. So, is it the case that Therians think about animals differently? We find that only about 3% of Therians are currently vegetarian, 14% were vegetarian at one time. That does not differ statistically significantly from furries. So being a Therian doesn't make you more likely to be a vegetarian. But you are more likely to support animal rights. And actually more Therians do consider themselves to be animal rights activists than furries do. The more you identify with your persona species, the more concern you have for animal welfare, and the more you sort of see animals as having thoughts and having sort of human-like traits. And yes, the more you identify with being a furry, so the more strongly you feel furry, the more you tend to anthropomorphize animal. That's what I just said. Bronies! Here we go. So, across 4 different samples. So this is consistent now. What percentage of the fandom is Brony?
I don't know, 10%.
Too many.
What?
10%?
Okay.
Statistically speaking, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of you in this crowd is a Brony.
I can point to one.
Interesting.
I'm a brony. I'm allowed to do this.
I used to be one, but now no more.
This figure says so much. Okay.
Yeah, I did.
So, on a scale of 0 to 100, how strongly do you feel towards these different groups? And blue bars is how furries rated them. Red bars is how bronies rated them. How do you feel about non-furries? Yeah. About average. Furries and bronies feel the same way. How do you feel about furries? Furries and bronies both like furries. How do you feel about bronies? Bronies really like bronies. How do furries feel bronies? About 1/3 of furries say that bronies are pretty cool. I like bronies. But 1/4, they're ambivalent. And about 40% of furries really don't like bronies. Half of furries say that, yeah, brony is a part of the fandom. About 25% of furries say there's some overlap, but they're kind of a different thing. And about 20% of furries say not at all, not even comparable to furries. They're not furries. So, reasons that these are the top reasons that furries gave to dislike bronies. Bronies aren't real furries, they're just the newest addition.
No.
For the gray muzzles, how many of you heard this argument for Pokemon?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sonic and everything else.
They're not in my fandom fallacy. Sorry, I'm jumping to my next slide here. Yes, bronies, there's not a lot of differences between bronies and furries, but among what we looked at, bronies were actually more likely to be in the fandom for longer than furries were. So it's not the case that bronies are invading the fandom.
No.
The people who have been here for longer are more likely to be bronies.
Yep. That's what I think.
Well said.
So here's the top list of reasons why furries dislike bronies. They're obnoxious, excessive, and they force their culture on others. Kill him! You gotta kill him! I have no idea where you're getting this from.
Here's the bird.
They're just not the same thing as furry. That's why I don't like them. I just hate them. I don't hate all bronies, just some of them.
Well, that's fair.
That was popular. It's unimaginative. It's just a fad, or it's really, really shallow and one-dimensional. It's silly, dumb, or immature. Because we are so...
He's only brushing his teeth.
Is that you?
Oh God, that hurt.
That's you, differences between furries and bronies? We actually find that there are some differences. Bronies in general have a slightly less formed sense of self. They're still struggling to find out who they are. And they were more likely to experience bullying throughout their entire life. Yeah, throughout their entire life. So,
Sex. Sex.